Okay, so you know that feeling. Sunday evening starts creeping in,
Oh, yeah.
and it just feels like the weekend vanished. Like, poof, and Monday's already sort of looming.
Absolutely. That weight settling in. It's incredibly common.
Right. So if that sounds familiar to you, well, you're definitely not the only one. And today, we're actually going to dig into an article that tackles this head on. It's called The Sunday Night Feeling.
And what's really compelling about this piece is its core idea. It basically says, look, this Sunday dread, it's not just you. It's not some personal flaw you need to fix.
Uh-huh.
Instead, the article argues it's a pretty understandable reaction to how modern work is structured.
Exactly. It's not just saying, yeah, Sundays can be a drag. It's suggesting this feeling is actually a symptom of something bigger, something systemic in our work culture. So our mission here for this deep dive is really to use this article as a guide, to unpack, what are those root causes? Why do so many of us feel this? Well, let's call it what the article almost does, this sense of impending doom on a Sunday night.
Okay, so let's start right there with what the article calls the Sunday funeral feeling. That specific anxiety, that sort of dread that shows up even though it's technically your day off.
Yeah, it's strange, isn't it? Why does our free time get so overshadowed by work?
Well, the article makes a case for it being systemic conditioning. We're just so wired into the weekly work rhythm.
That even our downtime is tainted by thinking about Monday.
Pretty much. And this is where it gets really fascinating.
Yeah.
The article brings in history. It points out that before the Industrial Revolution, it even mentions medieval peasants actually had more regular rest built into their lives.
More rest than us. Wow.
Yeah. It challenges that whole idea of linear progress, doesn't it? The article suggests the 5-day work week, the standard we mostly live by now, wasn't really designed for human flourishing.
Not for us, but for...
For maximizing factory output. Seriously.
Yeah.
It was about efficiency for the machines, not necessarily a sustainable rhythm for people. So it's not just less time, maybe, but the quality of that time is different, too.
Because we're always on, even when we're off.
Kind of. That cognitive load, that anticipation, it stops genuine rest. Something that arguably wasn't such a factor back then.
And the article really pushes this, right? It uses this pretty stark analogy.
It does. It suggests that modern workers in some ways are treated almost like productive units.
Like cogs in a machine.
Exactly, like parts on an assembly line, rather than, whole human beings with complex needs and lives outside of work.
Which I guess leads to the next point the article raises, this idea of potentially losing your identity in it all.
Yeah, this feeling of performing at work, being extra polite, holding back reactions.
Putting on the work face.
Right, that professional persona. You're not really bringing your whole authentic self to the table for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week.
And the article says this emotional labor, doing that constantly, it adds up.
It really does. The article calls it emotional disassociation. And over time, yeah, it can kind of chip away at your sense of who you actually are outside of that work role. It can lead to burnout, feeling disconnected.
And it makes that point about the small things too, doesn't it? Like saying yes to stuff that feels meaningless.
Mm-hmm. It frames it as giving away little pieces of yourself. Each yes to something pointless, or each time you stretch yourself for an unreasonable demand. It's like a small transaction where your energy benefits ultimately someone else's bottom line.
That's quite a way to put it, giving pieces of yourself away.
It is, and it even quotes Fight Club to hammer it home.
Oh, really? Which line?
You know the one. This is your life, and it's ending 1 minute at a time. It's used to highlight how valuable that time is and the potential cost of spending it feeling, well, not like yourself.
Okay, so if work drains us like this, what about rest? The article tackles why our downtime often doesn't feel, well, restful.
Yeah, this is a big one. Why can you spend a Sunday on the couch watching TV and still feel completely drained by Monday morning?
So what's the article's take?
It argues that kind of passive rest doesn't cut it when you're still living under this constant low-level hum of work stress.
The deadlines, the performance reviews, maybe feeling watched.
Exactly, all that stuff. True rest, the article suggests, needs freedom from that. Freedom from the fear, the monitoring, the constant pressure.
It uses another metaphor here, right? Something about the matrix.
It does. It compares that chronic tiredness, even when you have downtime, to being unknowingly plugged into the system.
So, like, you think you're relaxing, but you're still powering the machine.
Kind of, yeah. A simulation of choice, a simulation of rest, while the underlying drain just continues.
Wow. And that lack of real rest, it must spill over into other parts of life. relationships.
Inevitably. The article definitely connects those dots, how work exhaustion can erode our personal connections.
Makes sense. If you're totally depleted from your job, emotionally, mentally, what's left for your partner, your family, friends?
Very little, often. The article points out how even simple conversations can become shallow. Someone asks, "How are you?" and you just manage a quick, "Fine."
Yeah, that autopilot response.
Right. And that exhaustion over time can really weaken those important bonds. People become more isolated because work just takes everything.
And the article uses some strong words here, too.
It does. It actually talks about wage work in this context as a form of wage slavery, which is, a really provocative term.
Definitely. It really makes you think about that feeling of being trapped and
Right.
maybe feeling like something's missing. Like, is this really it?
And that leads perfectly into the next point. The article has a really interesting take on that "is this all there is" feeling.
It's not just burnout or depression.
Not necessarily, according to this perspective. The article frames it more as an awakening
An awakening to what?
to the possibility that maybe the things society tells us bring happiness, the career ladder, the stuff we buy, maybe they don't actually deliver on that promise, not on a deep human level.
So where does real meaning come from then, according to the article?
It argues it comes from more authentic things, creativity, genuine connection with people, living in line with your actual values, not just your job title.
And doesn't it bring in Chomsky here?
Yes, it mentions Noam Chomsky's perspective, the idea that society gives us this illusion of choice.
Different jobs, different schools.
Right. But Chomsky's view, as presented here, is that many of these choices still keep us locked within the same basic system, the system of debt, deadlines, desks, the grind.
It's quite a critical view of the whole setup. The article's author tried to find a way out, didn't they?
Yeah, it briefly mentions the author's own attempts trying to build a YouTube business, creating a course about authentic storytelling, sort of trying to carve out some independence.
Which probably wasn't easy.
No, and the article acknowledges that escaping the cycle is hard. There are no simple fixes. But it frames every step towards reclaiming your time, your energy, your independence as reclaiming a piece of your life.
Okay, so let's try to sort of crystallize the main takeaways here. What are the key insights from this deep dive into the article, The Sunday Night Feeling?
Well, I think there are three core points the article really drives home. First, that our current work culture, it wasn't an accident. It evolved to prioritize productivity, often over well-being.
It's not broken. It was built this way, essentially.
That's the argument, yeah. Second, that Sunday night dread, it's not irrational. It's presented as a pretty logical response to the pressures, maybe even the exploitation built into that system.
So the feeling itself is valid.
Very much so, according to the article. And third, achieving real well-being isn't passive. It requires actively trying to reclaim agency control over your time, your energy, your life outside the demands of work.
Right. It's an active process of reclaiming. So maybe something for you listening to think about as you head into the week. What does truly restorative rest actually look like and feel like for you, beyond just stopping work?
And maybe the bigger question the article leaves us with: how could we individually, maybe even collectively, reimagine work so that human well-being is valued just as much as productivity?
Yeah, definitely some heavy but important things to mull over. Hopefully this deep dive gave you some useful food for thought about your own relationship with work and that all too common Sunday night feeling.